British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is September 6th, 2018, and this is episode 102. Politicos is the BC Politics Podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you found us. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, where we're at PoliticosPod, and support the show at patreon.com/Politicos.
I'm Scott Limeboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, NAFTA. It's a quiet week. Apparently no one did anything over the long weekend. I guess John Horgan went to Labor Day festivals at the PNE, but there's nothing more to say about that, literally. So we'll talk about NAFTA and finally try to catch up as much as we can on that. First, though, we need to tell you that Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for your free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate for our listeners. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. And I saw on Twitter that the British Columbia Queen's Park Today empire is expanding to the province next door, and Alison Smith, the editor and publisher, is looking for a new Alberta Today reporter. So if you are based in Edmonton, want to cover provincial politics there, drop them a line because they do good work, and maybe you can get that free trial of the Alberta Today newsletter soon. Let's jump into the only segment today, putting the no in North American Free Trade Agreement. Is NAFTA dead?
No, maybe? I don't know. It's hard to say at the moment. It's not healthy, that's for sure.
We were trying to find out as much as we could because these are really hard things to cover because you have journalists who try and poke and prod at the negotiators, and in general, they don't want to talk to the press because they're trying to negotiate in private. Or if they do talk to the press, it might just be pure spin. But
that doesn't really apply to the president in this case, does it?
Things are a little different south of the border. So he's at some rally. He's saying NAFTA is basically over. You know, now he's signed a deal with Mexico and we're going to make a fairer deal with Canada, whatever that means. So we're in a weird state there.
Yeah, and also worth pointing out that it's not entirely clear if Trump can unilaterally withdraw from NAFTA anyway, because NAFTA is actually written into the U.S. laws. So it's kind of one of those fuzzy, unresolved issues of the whole thing.
Well, and I think any deal they reach will have to go to Congress, and that seems to be what they're angling towards, is a new deal to present to Congress, and that'll go forward. And it seems like the Mexican deal is ready to go, and the question is, will Canada be a part of it still?
Well, if I was Canada, I'd be trying to drag it out as long as possible till the other end of the midterms, when you might have a much less friendly to Donald Trump Congress, a much more friendly to NAFTA Congress, because things are now topsy-turvy and the Democrats are the party of NAFTA.
It's the situation where we basically have the choice between like a mediocre deal that preserves the status quo is the ideal, or things go worse. And that's whether we, maybe in some view, give up a whole bunch of things, or we just don't have a deal, in which case things are chaos. Trump's just acting like a bully and trying to be a bully, but doesn't actually know anything about economics, foreign trade.
Or the art of the deal, apparently.
Or reading books. So the main issues still on the table are the ones that have been on the table since we first talked about NAFTA and trade deals. I don't know, somewhere in probably our first dozen episodes. Although those would have been European trade deals, but they're the usual ones. Supply management.
Well, actually, I think Trump had been elected by the time we hit the 12-episode mark.
But it's the usual issues: supply management, cultural policy, and just protecting Canadian media and culture, and dispute resolutions. So Chapter 19, this dispute resolution mechanism, deals with the state-to-state dispute. And I guess this gets used a lot. So when Canada and the US get into battles over softwood lumber, or I guess we'll actually get to this in a bit, but paper tariffs, you get together a expert panel of representatives of both countries, and they negotiate out, or at least rule on, a settlement. This is slow, expensive, and I guess something Trump would rather just do away with. And Canada would just rather preserve the status quo because we're a smaller country and we'll get pushed around a lot by a bully.
So yeah, I'm not enough of an expert to really say whether or not it's worth keeping. I've heard mixed things, and yeah, I honestly have no idea on this one. So, if there are any international trade experts listening, drop us a line on this one.
That's the policy for this whole segment. Well, moving back up the list, cultural policy is the thing that Trudeau has most recently threatened to walk away from the deal if he doesn't win on, which I think may be the only thing he's drawn a red line in the sand. And this is Canada's an exemption, essentially, that media from the US can't buy up Canadian media and produce crap.
Well, I think that's only because the supply management thing is just such a truism now you don't even have to say it. But yeah, so it's definitely been a bit of a touchy subject with Canada. I can see why Trudeau wants to draw a hard line on it. And I don't know, as far as if we're gonna ban non-Canadians from owning stuff in Canada, seems like one of the more reasonable ones. Definitely more so than, say, our telecoms rules, our airline rules, banking rules. There's other ones that make less sense.
The cultural stuff is a particular, I think, hot button in Quebec. And given that they're in the midst of an election right now, and the Liberals need a lot of seats in Quebec, or to hold a lot of seats in Quebec, they're going to play very close to keeping cultural exemptions for as much as we can. Now, I mean, the US media still dominates Canada. You can watch all of your favorite American Hollywood movies with Canadian actors and sitcoms on TV, and Netflix is exempt from the whole thing. So it's a bit antiquated, but I don't know if it's the hill to die on, but there is that element of, what about the CBC?
Yeah, as far as the economics impacts go, it seems like probably one of the least consequential of them. It's then I guess just a question of, where do you draw the line on culture? But yeah, I can't see this, whether we keep it, whether we get rid of it, really affecting the economic course of Canada too much.
But it affects the heart and soul of the country.
So that in some way makes it a little harder to reconcile, because that's not quite such a simple numbers game as the rest of these.
Well, and it's not really a simple numbers game either. There are a lot of numbers. The complex numbers game is supply management.
Although not actually complex numbers in the mathematical sense, but...
Oh, you made that joke. So supply management, we've talked to death a couple times about. It's still on the table. Well, and in the American point of view, in Canada's point of view, it is not. We want to maintain our dairy cartels. And Maxime Bernier seems to be the only person out there who's screaming, throw it to the wood chipper. Although his whole position on Trump is just give in to everything and then there's no problem.
In Bernier's defense, I think he probably wouldn't characterize it that way. It's maybe a little more, we shouldn't have these policies anyway, so what are we losing when we give up something we shouldn't have in the first place? And, that's actually a fairly reasonable argument on supply management. Now, I'm happy to get rid of it, but, if we can trade it for a concession, that's even better than just unilaterally ditching it.
It's not clear where this whole negotiation's going. The Liberals like supply management, the Conservatives like supply management, the NDP like supply management. The political consensus isn't going to sacrifice this.
No, although it should. But yeah, the political consensus definitely isn't there. Although, from a how do you deal with Trump point of view, giving him a big win on something like that's actually also kind of helps us too. It might be the thing that gets Trump to go along. He can go to Wisconsin and brag about how he, got a fair deal from Canada. We get more affordable cheese. It's a win-win.
That works with a traditional negotiator. He's a bully who he doesn't want to see a win-win. Yeah. He wants to see a U.S. win.
Yes. We don't treat it as publicly to Trump. We don't tell him it's a win-win. We pretend we're conceding something horrible and then let him brag about it.
But there's no incentive for politicians to do that domestically. This whole thing breaks down because they need to get reelected here. Instead, we're fighting a bully and you need to just treat them like one and be like, no, you can't have your toys. This is why we have stories coming out of the U.S. media about how they're hiding trade documents from him so he doesn't get a temper tantrum.
Yeah, or sign stupid stuff, which is a little concerned. I get that the US government just generates so much stuff, not everything gets up to the president's desk. Like, that document John pulled away, like, it seems like the sort of thing from my reading of it that, like, this is something the president ordered, where the director of the National Economic Council just steals a document from the president's desk, and the president just, like, forgets a major policy thing he was going to do. Like, that kind of indicates Trump isn't all there in the head. I mean, I think a lot of us suspected.
This allegation comes out of this Woodward book that all the U.S. press is talking about, where the presidency is described as crazy town and all other kinds of arguably well-substantiated, or at least multiple people confirm these sources. It seems like it's a well-researched book where people just describe it as in chaos, and maybe they're talking about invoking the 25th Amendment, that he's unfit for office.
Like, you probably made a solid case for that.
But the specific allegation you're referring to is about Gary Cohn taking a piece of paper off Trump's desk so he wouldn't make some rash decision. And this comes out in the same week, roughly, or maybe even just after, that Bloomberg leaked, or somehow this quote-unquote off-the-record conversation gets from Bloomberg to the Toronto Star. So the president of the U.S., for whatever reason, is doing an interview with Bloomberg. That's normal. He then decides the way journalism works is by going off the record, like literally just saying the words and then continuing on to say things where the journalist may or may not have agreed.
Yeah, you're supposed to get confirmation before going into that.
Yeah. You don't just go, hey, this is a secret, and then just ramble on for another 10 minutes. But in his ramblings, he basically brags that Canada's working their asses off, and every time we, the US, have a problem with a point, he just puts up a picture of a Chevy Impala and other random things like that, how he's just like treating the whole thing like a joke, thinks Canada's going to get a sucker deal. So that gets out, and it looks like the whole thing is in chaos because there's a madman in the White House who you just can't deal with. And then, he goes on Twitter and describes the whole thing as fiction, but not, and then also maybe suggests someone's a traitor. And
well, I think the traitor one was part of the when there was an anonymous op-ed in the New York Times,
because that also came out
from
this week.
someone in a senior
staffer.
person in the White House, to which Trump just tweeted treason,
right,
all caps, question mark.
So normal politics. Derek Burney is quoted. He's a former Canadian ambassador and one of the key NAFTA negotiators from back in the 80s. He's talking to the Toronto Star, and he goes, I could not write fiction this crazy. And he goes on to say about Trump, you've got that if you're trying in the US to like really settle this deal, he's going to be their big stumbling block, not the negotiation teams who are trying their best, just doing their job, just following orders. He says about the president, you've got to catch him between his tantrums. If I were our team, Canada's, I'd be urging the Americans to be very careful about when they present whatever it is they're going to present to him. I don't know what time of day that would be. I think it would clearly not be late evening, like early night when he goes on Twitter rampages.
That's early morning, I think, is the
that
most
probably is
rampagey part.
Also going to avoid that time too, probably.
Maybe like right after lunch, like.
Yeah, I think you also have to go by how many Diet Cokes he's had. There's like some probably chart you can do. And so that's where NAFTA's at.
Yeah, and if anything, it's like we're dealing with the problem of having a completely unreliable bad person on the other side. But if anything, it's actually the negotiators who are probably having the biggest trouble with it all is the Americans who like can't actually know and treat it as if they have, the actual confidence of the president where they can really negotiate on his behalf.
Yeah.
So, fun times. Let's hope this gets dragged out until after the midterms and the political situation down south gets a little better for us.
I just don't know what happens if they have this deal with Mexico go through that kind of supersedes their involvement in NAFTA, and we're kind of left with.
I think, it's weird because, our deal with Mexico would still be in place. It's weird. I don't know. Not an international trade lawyer. But what I gather, we'd still have a trade deal with Mexico, and then that's complicated.
Well, the other thing that happened this summer that was a bit complicated and I think we totally missed despite its impact. And I alluded to this in our full discussion last week. But halfway through the summer, the US implemented a bunch of tariffs on the import of paper from Canada. I guess the US newsprint media, just like the Canadian one, has been struggling. It costs a lot of money to print a daily newspaper, and not a lot of people are reading them anymore. They're getting them online or just reading fake news on Facebook.
Yeah, it turns out dead tree is not a particularly cost-effective method of transmitting information.
But we produce a lot of it here in BC because we have a lot of trees. So we have a big company called Catalyst Paper Corp. It's based out of Richmond, but they have manufacturing facilities in Powell River, on Vancouver Island,
Which
around the
makes
province.
sense. Richmond isn't exactly renowned for its forests.
And they were exporting a lot of their product, paper, to the States. There's another company, Kruger Inc., out of Montreal that was doing the same. And in about early August, late July, the U.S. Commerce Department decided that the imports from Catalyst Paper should be tariffed at 20.26%, and Kruger should face 9.53%. And those are lower numbers than was initially pitched of 28.25% for Catalyst and over 32% for Kruger. So not as terrible.
Yeah, it does make me curious. Like, 2 decimal places of accuracy? Like, why that number? Why 32.09? Now I'm just curious about the formula that leads to that precise a tariff percentage. That's neither here nor there, but like
it is a very weird amount, and like that accuracy will affect. We're talking big business here, so this does affect things.
Yeah, like that's probably like millions of dollars worth of tariffs at some point, but like it just seems weird.
But the U.S. International Trade Commission got that later in August and went, actually, it's not Canadian paper that's doing anything illegal and therefore crushing the American newspaper industry. It's just essentially that it's not a profitable industry. And so the 5 commissioners on that panel voted unanimously that there's no injury to U.S. industry by Canadian producers and the tariffs are invalid. So
it's pure protectionism on their part.
Essentially. And so this goes, ironically, a little bit back to some of those dispute resolution things, although I am not sure whether this is the NAFTA dispute resolution or just like a U.S. internal justification.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like one of those I guess this would be a Chapter 11 in this case, since it would be a company bringing the action. Anyway, once again, we're not international trade lawyers, but like I think it's a different process.
And it sounds like even U.S. newspapers were getting frustrated by this tariff because it was raising their costs.
As tariffs do.
So they were having an even tougher time printing. I don't even really understand what precipitated these, other than probably just the sort of ongoing trade war we've been in for a year.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe this is because we taxed their inflatable rafts or whatever else we did.
Maybe. I mean, I'd say it was Trump trying to get back at the media he seems to be having such a fight with, but I don't think he thinks 2 steps ahead. So, probably not. This is just probably one of those reactionary, I'm going to put some tariffs on some stuff, just because.
But in the end, good news for paper-making jobs in Powell River and elsewhere, because 20% tax on all your products is a good way to kill your industry.
Yeah, it's not fun having to deal with those. Well, moving on to quick takes. We have a bit of a follow-up from last week's discussion. The Sasquatch case, which we discussed with Micah. The ruling came out the following morning. So actually, our astute legal listeners may have actually had the information before they got the podcast. But turns out Todd Standing didn't really have standing, and his case got tossed out.
It got tossed on every possible grounds. Like, the lawyer got slapped down because he apparently did have representation in the end. Which lawyer from New West? I think we looked him up, but we won't say his name here. That feels cruel.
Our listeners can do that themselves. But yeah, apparently some lawyer felt it was worth his time to take this on.
Standing had claimed things like this is an attack on his human rights because political belief is a protected ground a bit in BC, but the judge just points out the belief in the existence of the Sasquatch is not an immutable personal characteristic. So it's kind of, I was going to say it's like believing in aliens or things, but it's not a religion, they basically say. He was trying to like construct this offense of his religion. He, at every single paragraph, I guess the counsel for him had actually made arguments based on the Supreme Court of Canada, but on a ruling, but rather than quote the majority or the precedent, they quoted the dissent, which is not binding. So he quoted the people who didn't agree with what the law is. And there can be value to that, but you can't quote them as though that is the law.
Yeah, I could see why a judge would slap someone down for doing that, because that's either incompetence or actively deceiving, or neither of them are good in a lawyer.
Apparently, also during the arguments they were making in submissions, the counsel for Mr. Standing handed a sheet of potential amendments, which the plaintiff asked the court to consider. And the judge goes, yeah, none address these issues. You just like gave me a scrap of paper with like jargon written on it, magic words, and the magic words didn't do anything. So they dismiss his case with no reasonable prospect of success. They give the defendant, which is the government of BC, costs payable by the plaintiff forthwith. So he's now owes the BC government, which is, I'm sure, just going to play into his conspiracy theory that now the BC government is in league with the courts, because that's how these work. That's what happens when you file frivolous lawsuits. You get slapped with costs.
Yes, and get made fun of on a podcast.
But yeah, we'll link to the decision. You can go through and read it. I'd recommend just skipping ahead to the analysis, the latter half of the analysis, but it's not too long. It's only, in the end, 31 paragraphs. So yeah, Sasquatch doesn't exist, say the BC courts. Or at least they don't have to rule on it. But a more meaningful trial is coming up. We've talked in the past a few times about Vice Admiral Mark Norman, who's been in some hot water, and it sounds like the hot water is going to take us into the next federal election.
Yeah, so the trial date was set for the former Vice Chief of Defense Staff, Mark Norman, and turns out it's scheduled to start on August 19th of 2019, which is just a little ways before the October 2019 election, so...
Pretty sure it was during the writ of the last election, with how long that one went.
Yeah, because the writ dropped on August 3rd, so hopefully it won't be quite that long, but because it's a Fitz election, everybody's basically going to start campaigning as soon as we're into the 12-month window. So yeah, expect this to blow up during the election, especially because this controversy around his firing and criminal charges relates to a whole bunch of money that was spent on a national shipbuilding program that has faced some controversies.
Yeah, just the quickest recap is Norman is charged with leaking cabinet secrets and documents around that, and he denies it. And I guess we can get to the truth of the matter in the midst of an election, even though the ruling probably won't come then. But lots of stuff will come out, which will be delicious.
Well, the national shipbuilding strategy isn't the only thing facing troubled seas right now, as the spill response improvements for Canada's west coast have been put on hold, because it turns out the money was coming from the pipeline project. So with that on hold, nobody's making any more investments in that world-class spill response we were promised.
I mean, on the one hand, we kind of mostly would have needed it in case we had a pipeline expansion.
There is still a pipeline coming through here.
Yes, there's still a good excuse for having it. But we would even more need it if there was more product going through. That said, this is kind of like, in my view, Notley pulling out of the climate plan because she didn't get the thing. It's one of the... You can have the environmental thing if you want, if you accept the non-environmental thing that you don't want. Because it's like treating policy like children.
Like there's compromises in politics?
You can have dessert if you have your vegetables.
But
there's always money. There could be money because they just bought a pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, they spent $4.5 billion. What's an extra 150 million? Especially because the one wrinkle in this is the leases have already been signed for the properties in Nanaimo and elsewhere that were going to be the base for this. And so the question remains is, we have these 25-year leases now, but in theory, no money to actually do anything with them. So now what?
Build empty homes. Well, moving on to land, as of September 1st, a bunch of new rules came into effect in British Columbia. The payday lender rules that we talked about briefly earlier in the year, I believe, are in effect, which I think's a good thing. Those are evil places that prey on the weak and poor. But some of the other new rules that came in are around organic products. We now have a sort of approach to certification. So when you go into Whole Foods or whatever hippy-dippy grocery store you go to here in Vancouver, and you buy your bread that has a little sticker that says organic, it now has to actually mean something. Now, I'll get into a rant in a second about why that meaning something means nothing. But before September 1st, you could just put the word organic on any food and mean nothing. You could just do it as a marketing ploy.
And now you can do it as a market employee.
That's
But it's certified.
Because you have to get certified by one of, I thought it was just one body, but it turns out it's there's a federal umbrella of certifications that are approved, and then there's like a provincial umbrella of certifications that are approved. And depending who you can get one of two stickers to put on your food. And it really is not inspiring confidence when you can't narrow down to a single certification body.
You mean so you can find out which one's more organicer than the other?
Well, yeah. So they all relate to restrictions on synthetic herbicides, pesticides, hormones, and genetically modified organisms. All things that, as a farmer, my dad has used.
But
you can use natural.
non-transgenic modified organisms. Those are fine, right?
Oh, totally. And you can also use natural herbicides, including some pretty strong ones. My favorite part, though, is when I go onto this certification umbrella page, and it had a FAQ where the first question was literally, is organic healthier? And their answer starts with citing a poll and saying many people believe it is healthier than conventional farming, which is not how science works.
60% of doctors can't be wrong.
They said 80% of British Columbians in the poll that they commissioned, or one of...
Well, I think, wasn't it 80% of organic purchasers in the poll that the organic lobby commissioned said they thought organic was healthy, which is shocking. I tell you, shocking.
Well, to the organic industry's credit, Big Organic, they cite a few studies that show that organic foods may have higher vitamins and other antioxidants, and one study that literally describes itself as mixed results in the title. Great. I mean, if you want organic, go for it. At least now you know that that label applies to something and they have to follow the rules, you think. But I'd much rather have, I don't know, can we get a science-based food label? Is that too callous and cynical? But yeah, go buy organic if you want it. It means something, except that it doesn't.
Isn't even that great for the environment, because it turns out you have to just use a whole bunch more land for the same amount of food. So, real mitzbag, and I'll be saving a little extra money and using more land-effective food. What isn't environmentally friendly is removing toll from bridges, which brings us to our next story, where turns out the government of Canada is a little behind on their bridge toll payments.
Huge credit to CTV News for filing the FOIs on this and finding out who was late in paying their overdue tolls after the Port Mann and Golden Ears Bridge closed their tolling booths and are basically just trying to collect the last fees.
They don't really have a tolling booth.
No, the cameras. They
Yes.
turn the cameras off. The government of Canada, it turns out, had a single account, and that account was overdrawn for $60,000 worth of tolls, which is a lot of $3.50 trips. But they were only second to one man who described himself as in a active tax result. This is JMP Trucking President Juan Ledo, who pointedly notes that he will pay his own personal tolls, but it's his company that's revolting. He then tells CTV about the lawsuit he's filing with ICBC after his trucks burned down, and he blames the Burnaby Fire Department for not coming fast enough, and so he's suing them or something, and then not paying his tolls because of that, because
It seems weird.
Trello and ICBC are the same. But the BC government, it turns out, ironically, is also on the hook. They don't have a single account, but rather a number of different ministries have their own Trello accounts, and each of those, or a number of those, I guess, are also overdrawn, which is a little unfortunate and embarrassing.
Yeah, but it's only 30 grand they owed, and they apparently have paid it eventually, so trying to this, and nowhere near as bad as the 70 grand. That's a lot of, even with the, $9.45 toll, that's a lot of trips across the bridge.
Well, I'm sure they'll find a way to get it from him eventually. People always amuse me. But we want to close off with one more set of amusing and interesting people. There's a new political party in BC.
Yes, there is.
Rural BC Party. This is the mayor of, I believe it's Telkwa and Houston. I guess I should.
I really don't know either of those, which it probably indicates that this party may actually have a point if neither of us are really super sure where it's based out of. Middle of nowhere, because it's somewhere in the interior of BC.
It's on Highway 3.
Okay.
Those places. I drove through them in the summer. They're nice. Small towns, very vintage BC. The Rural BC Party, though, wants to stand up for rural British Columbia and Victoria. They don't feel like rural voices have been represented enough, which fair, fine. Their strategy is to run in 23 rural ridings, so everywhere except the Lower Mainland.
So we're not going to see the rural party be winning in Vancouver West End.
No, and they're not even going to run in Kelowna, it looks like.
Yeah, or Squamish, which is weird because that actually looks like a very big riding that extends quite a ways into the interior, which you think would balance out enough to be there, but I guess not.
There's no clear policies set for this party yet. I guess they're hoping for a founding convention to discuss that.
I'm guessing they're probably not going to be big on spending the, $1 billion-ish the provincial government just chipped into the transit expansion here.
I mean, they may not have an opinion on it, or it may be you spend $1 in Vancouver, you spend $1 in Telkwa. Realistically, they probably don't have much of a chance, but under first past the post, if you focus on specific regions, you can do better than trying to run in 87 ridings across the province.
Yeah, they're never going to be a government, but maybe they could pick up a few seats, try and create a minority situation where they can leverage.
And it will also be interesting to see where they come out on proportional representation. My suspicion is they will be very anti, but I also wonder if some of the systems might actually benefit rural voices and bring more rural representation forward, or at least more diverse rural representation. DMP, like we talked about, would give you minority voices in those communities. MMP, if it has regional lists rather than provincial ones, could do the same, and so would the rural-urban system provide different levels of representation. Now, that doesn't work for the BC Liberals who want to have a uniform voice across there, but that I think actually brings out the most important question, which is the BC Liberals actually own most of those ridings right now.
Yeah, and in fact, if anything, I'd argue they've probably been maybe a little too focused on those ridings to the exclusion of Metro Vancouver. They're especially kind of leading up to the last election. They really did seem more focused on the interior than the cities, and that's where a lot of their base is, so I get it, but it's just the population distribution and where the ridings are makes that not necessarily the best play politically.
Well, but if they view Andrew Wilkinson as too Vancouver, which
and he is very Vancouver.
Rich Vancouver as opposed to the NDP part of Vancouver, but maybe he's got a weakness on the one side.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot to do it, and who knows who they're going to nominate to run. But as I've just discovered on their website, they have a nominate a friend page. So, if you know someone in rural BC who might want to run for office, you can in fact nominate them.
I know someone in Revelstoke.
Yeah, maybe you should nominate them. They also have a nominate yourself, press to run for them yourself, which, it's not just getting Pressgate into.
And it's not as good as the BC Conservatives submit a policy page, which I don't think they have anymore.
When they updated their website from GeoCities to whatever their current one
MySpace.
is, they got a little better than that. It's not so bad that I laugh at it anymore, which is saying something because that was an epically bad website. And that has been Politicos. Find links to stories we mentioned in the show notes at politicos.ca. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at politicostpod. Leave us a review and let us know what you think. Support the show and get early access to our interviews at patreon.com/politicos. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send to us. Thanks for listening.